so now we're going to talk about the origin and the evolution of life on Earth. So, how could life have possibly come into existence? Uh, the first step is we've got to have the fundamental building blocks of life, which is going to be those amino acids and nucleic acids uh, that need to be strung together in order to be able to make life. And so that is really not that difficult to do. So it turns out that if you have some raw inorganic materials that come out of volcanoes or on comets, then when that gets hit by ultraviolet light or by electricity, it can manufacture those amino acids and nucleic acids and sugars. So that part actually is not that difficult to do. But the next part is incredibly difficult to do because we need to take those nucleic acids, we need to string them together to make RNA so that the RNA can make the proteins, and then the proteins can make everything else. And a typical protein is like 500 of these nucleic acids that have to be strung together in exactly the correct order. So if they're not in the correct order, then it doesn't make anything that will fold correctly to make a protein. So scientists have figured that this happened by chance, so that there were trillions and trillions and trillions of reactions that were going on in the ocean where, let's say you've got some clay, and then here is a nucleic acid minding its own business, and then it gets stuck onto the clay. And then another nucleic acid is minding its own business, and it gets stuck to the clay right next to this nucleic acid, and then the two of them stick together. And then you end up forming a chain of them. And now, ordinarily, that chain isn't going to do anything. But if you've got trillions and trillions of chains forming all over the Earth in the Earth's early oceans, maybe one of those turns out to work. And then you start to develop life when that happens. We think that the earliest forms of life were not based on DNA, but they were based on RNA. And then later, DNA developed from RNA. Okay, the next step is we need to have a cell membrane in order to put all of our chemical reactions inside of it. That's not so difficult to do. So anytime that you mix oil and water, they always are going to separate. And if you agitate the oil and the water, have you ever noticed it makes bubbles of oil? So that would be a primitive cell membrane. So that one's not so difficult. Okay, then the next thing is you got to have just the right chemical reactions. And so these are very simple chemical reactions that, for example, take light, carbon dioxide, and water, and then turns it into a sugar. So that would be a chemical reaction. Another chemical reaction is if you take sugar and you break it apart into its component pieces, it produces energy, and that's what the mitochondria do. Well, the chemical reactions inside your body are very complex, so it would have taken a long time for life to have developed very complex chemical reactions. So this would be hard to do. And then the next thing is, how did all of the little organelles, how did they arise inside of cells? And so we think that some of those organelles could have come into being as a regular cell ate a little bacteria. But instead of digesting the bacteria, what happened was that the cell began to feed the bacteria. And then the bacteria, in turn, began to give off energy that the cell could use. And that's the origin of the mitochondria inside of cells. And so there are some other organelles, which we were not going to talk about, but there are some other organelles inside of a cell that possibly could have the same kind of an origin, in which a cell incorporated a bacteria that's specialized in doing these particular kinds of chemical reactions. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about the geological and biological history of the Earth.